So I'm going to start off sort of with personal story of how I ended up going into education as a field. When I came to Pomona, um, I decided to major in economics pretty early on. Um, I I took a freshman seminar in economics from Hans Palmer. I thought it was stimulating and interesting. I was signed to Gordon Douglas as my advisor. And so I started off in economics and I found it interesting. And by sophomore year, I was thinking that I would probably want to go on and get a PhD in economics and become an economist and work at a university or for a government agency. I was thinking, for example, about the Agency of International Development. Um, and then various things happened that sort of soured me on economics at the time that I was Pomona and I never really conceived of myself as becoming a teacher, but I began to have experiences that involved teaching that I found really interesting, stimulating, valuable kind of experiences. And one of those was that there was a group called Project Open Future. It was led by a Presbyterian minister named Paul Raymond. And I developed a friend, Mark Terry. I don't know if anybody knows Mark Terry, but he was in the class of 69, I think. And so Project Open Future would bring in groups of, I think, mainly ninth graders from East Los Angeles and bring them onto our campus. And we would put them in small groups of like six and tutor them or teach them on subject that they were wanting to get tutored on, frequently math. And so I started doing that, and it happened on Saturdays. So a few hours of my Saturdays were often devoted to working with kids from in Project Open Future, and nearly all of them were African American teenagers. I mean, growing up in Colorado, in my high school, it was like 99% white. I, there was not a single black student at Wheat Ridge High School where I went. There were a few Hispanic students, um, but you know, racial diversity was not something that I had encountered. Um, and then in the summer of 67, after junior year, I had been elected student body president. And I was contacted by this guy from Stanford named Dwight Clark. And he ran a program called Volunteers in Asia that was just Stanford students. Um, he kind of considered it an alternative service to fighting in Vietnam, that you would go to Asia and contribute something positive. And he wanted to expand this Volunteers in Asia from Stanford to include students from Pomona College. And I think he thought that because I had just been elected student body president, that it would be good if I participated and came back and helped recruit other people to be interested in it the following year. And so I was sent to the island of Mindanao in the Philippines and spent most of the summer there. Uh, but our project, I think, was negotiated with the university. It was a brand new university. in the northern part of Mindanao. So the island of Mindanao is overwhelmingly Muslim, and the northern Philippines is overwhelmingly Catholic. And so the educators in Manila had decided to open this university in the Muslim Philippines, and they wanted to teach. Um, I mean, I think instruction in all Filipino universities is in English. So they wanted to bring English and, but the strange assignment that I was given was to teach speed reading to increase the speed at which students could read. And I was given no books, no text, no equipment. In anticipation, I went to a friend of mine who owned a company of dealing with educational technology and had this thing called a tachistoscope that would flash passages on a screen, and you could adjust the rate at which you were flashing these passages. And the idea was a tool to get people to be able to read faster, sort of by focusing on the middle of the screen rather than going from left to right and capturing it in blocks. And so I had that thing, and I had some passages, and I hadn't done any homework on the power grid. And the second I turned it on, it blew out because the it was wired for 110, and they had everything was 220 at this university. So on the first day, I was thinking, now what? What the hell am I supposed to do? But the students were they were all Muslim, they were all male, and they were really curious about me. I mean, and why had this American come down there? And I had never, I don't think, met a Muslim person. I had no particular preconceived concepts about what this was going to be like. And so we just basically talked, uh, and whatever people wanted to talk about, we would talk about. I thought, well, what the hell? It's got to be good. We're learning English. We're having conversations in English. And so, not too far into this, one of my students came up to me after the class and said, uh, so, Mr. Davis, you believe in God? And I knew the right answer was yes. And I said, yes. And he said, are you a Catholic? I said, no. He said, are you a Jew? I said, no. He said, well, my dad is the imam at the mosque. If you wanted to, you could go worship in the mosque with me. And I said, well, I'd like to do that. So we go down to the mosque, and he says, okay, so now we have to purify ourselves. And so we're going to wash our hands, and we're going to wash our head, and we're going to wash our feet, take off our shoes. And the important thing is, while we're doing this, we must not look up. Because if you see a woman, we'll be spiritually unclean. We'll have to start all over again. So we did our ablutions. We went into the mosque in the back row, and I just did what he did. Every time he knelt, I kneeled, and when he stood, I stood. And I thought, I'm being invited into something that my guess is people are almost never invited to participate in. I felt really honored and like I was having an experience that was rare. And I went on to develop a closeness to these students, and they really liked me. I think only because everybody else felt that they, I mean, for example, one of the people who introduced himself to me was the student body president of the university, and he had come down from Manila. They had sent down a bunch of students from Manila who were all Catholic to sort of set the tone and in their minds create a base of quality students. And he just went on and on about how this Marawi language that they spoke was a real handicap because it made it so hard, much harder for them to learn English than people from the north who spoke Tagalog. And he was, I was saying, well, there ought to be courses here in the history of this island and the Muslim presence. He says, oh my God, no, that's a terrible idea. I mean, we're trying to get them away from that stuff. And so anyway, I left that summer thinking, you know, uh, I really like meeting people who are culturally different than me, exchanging um, languages and ideas. And this is exciting. Um, and I came back, and it turned out that one of the people that I really admired at Pomona College was Steve Shaffron. Does anybody know Steve Shaffron? He was, I think, 1 year ahead of me, class of '67, and he had been chair of the International Relations Forum and had invited me to speak at it uh, after my sophomore year, which I spent at the University of Moscow in an advanced Russian program. And so then Steve, that summer that I'd been teaching in the Philippines, he had been at the Korea desk of the Agency for International Development. And he and I were particularly interested in the Agency for International Development because a Pomona graduate, David Bell, headed the agency. And we thought, well, that's cool. As long as he's there, we could probably get hired and we could have an insider view of what goes on at the Agency for International Development. Well, Shaffron said, Alan, this was horrible. I sat all summer at the Korea desk of the Agency for International Development, and our whole role was to bribe the Koreans into contributing troops to fight in Vietnam. And we were saying, we'll send a lot of free rice your way if you'll up your troop contribution from 1,000 to 5,000. And so he said that it was all that I did, was negotiating with the Koreans about what kind of support they would give to the American effort in Vietnam. And he said, forget it. You don't want to work for the Agency for International Development. And David Bell's not our hero. So I thought, crap, I've got to rethink my future here. So then, senior year, I had decided that my real interest in economics was in economic development. And Gordon Douglas taught the only elective course in economic development. And it was scheduled at 8 a.m. And I had worked very hard all the time I'd been in Pomona to never have to take an 8 o'clock class. But there I was. So my strategy to stay awake was to sit in the front row, where it would just be impossibly embarrassing to fall asleep in a course taught by my advisor on the topic that I had most looked forward to taking. but I couldn't keep myself awake. I mean, Douglas was so boring and so monotone. And I was so sleepy at 8 o'clock in the morning. I would bring little things of water to pour on my head during the class to wake me up and, sort of slap myself in the face from time to time. But I hated the damn course. And I thought, this career is not working out for me. I'm not learning about economic development. And the other thing was that I was really interested in socialist approaches to economic development. The whole war on poverty, the whole Cold War thing about expansion of communism, I thought if we could end poverty, communism really wouldn't have that much of an appeal. So I was thinking, I want to be an economist who helps end poverty, has ideas and papers and books about enlightened approaches to economic development that would make communism unattractive to developing countries. And Gordon Douglas, and in fact, nobody in the economics department, as far as I could tell, thought that was a good idea. Um, Douglas's approach was bring about economic development by increasing trade and specializing in what a particular economy is good at and having a more global trade system. So there I was. And then the other thing that happened was that the Project Open Future thing was growing, became more extended. And then they decided to have a summer program after graduation, the summer of 1968. They had got an agreement with Midland School, which is right south of Los Olivos, California, close to Ojai, California, a boarding school out in the wilderness. And so Mark Terry and I went to teach there. And the students were all African American from Los Angeles. And so we boarded and we were living with these kids. And it was a real experience for me. I mean, you know, and shocking in some ways. I mean, to hear these kids call each other nigger all the time was just mind blowing to me. And we had a lot of arguments about music. I said I liked Aretha Franklin. They really approved of that. I said I liked Jefferson Airplane. They said, "Oh my God, those are druggies, druggy hippies. That's evil music, man." Jefferson Airplane? No. The idea that one person could love Jefferson Airplane and Aretha Franklin at the same time was unbelievable to these students. And so that ended, and I was pretty fired up about it. I had had a very positive experience. And then, was now fully aware that it was August, September was coming, and never in my life had I not known what I was going to do in September. And I really had no idea what the hell I was going to do in September. But during the year, I had taken the GRE, I had taken the law school admission test, I had taken the GRE achievement test in economics. And so I thought, I could apply to law school or to, oh, and the other thing is that there was some arrangement between Columbia University and the Pomona Economics Department that there was an agreement that the economics department could award a full scholarship to Columbia to study economics to a pupil, and I was awarded this thing. I had a full um, paid program to become a PhD student in economics at Columbia University. And I thought, okay, I cannot do that. I will not do that. I mean, and so I went to the economics department and said, I can't accept it. Thank you very much. Um, at that time, I was a close friend with Marion Vandewater, and she wanted to get a PhD in economics. I don't know where she ended up going, but she and I were, she was my economics buddy, and she went on to become an economics professor. But I got on a bus in Los Angeles and started heading east. You have to go east. And I, my, the only thing that was clear in my mind was that I was headed toward Colorado, but I would not go home without having established clearly what I was going to do in September. Because if I did, I would forfeit all the adult maturity that I had acquired in the last 4 years, because my mother would sweep down on me and say, "You don't have a job? I have 22 friends that could probably offer you a job. I'm going to call all of them and we'll see who offers you a job. And you can stay right here and live at home and do that job." And I thought, this is not going to happen. I am not going home without a job. So, another thing that had happened senior year was that I had taken philosophy of education course from W.T. Jones, which I totally loved. And it was the second philosophy course I had ever taken. And I loved W.T. Jones. And the other thing was that the psychology department offered a course in educational psychology, and I took it. And in that course, there was this peculiar guy named Prescott Winslow III, who it turned out was a Harvard undergraduate who had taken a leave of absence from Harvard. And then he'd gone and been a Vista volunteer on the Pima Reservation outside of Phoenix. And then he had uh, come to Pomona College um, under the ruse of being a transfer student. He applied and was admitted to Pomona, but and this was senior year, but he had no intention of graduating from Pomona. He was going to go graduate from Harvard. He was just hanging out at Pomona. And so we took educational psychology together. And I said, this raises all kinds of interesting questions to me, like, what should we be doing in Native American education? I mean, how should that work? And Press Winslow said, "Well, if you're interested in that, I got a guy you need to talk to. His name's Tom Cummings. He lives in Gallup, New Mexico. He's got contacts with all kinds of schools. He's the director of Navajo Department of Educational Development, not education, economic development." So I wrote to this guy, Tom Cummings, and said, this was senior year. And I said, "I'd like to meet you. Press Winslow says great things about you." And I get a letter back saying, "Yeah, come and spend Christmas vacation with me. And here's my phone number and address in Gallup." So I had taken a train to Gallup in the Christmas of 1967, middle of senior year. And I call Tom Cummings' phone number, and some young person answers the phone. And I said, "So I'm here to stay and spend Christmas vacation with Tom Cummings. Are you Tom Cummings?" And I said, Now he went to Massachusetts to spend Christmas with his family. And I said, "Oh, crap." I said, "Well, that's okay. There's a group of us hanging out in his house. We'll just come pick you up, and you can stay at his house." So these were Navajo kids that were like 20 years old that were staying in Tom's house. And I went up there and stayed, and then uh, went up to Colorado for the end of Christmas vacation and then back to Pomona. So anyway, now that I had graduated, now that I had taught summer school at Midland School with Project Open Future, I was headed back to Tom Cummings' house. And so I get to Gallup, and so this guy, Tom Cummings, um, was a character like nobody had ever met. He had graduated from Harvard in majoring in anthropology. He was about 12 years older than I was, and he's he was a Roman Catholic, um, and he seemed to have taken some sort of Jesuit oath of poverty. I mean, seemed like a monk to me. He was single, didn't have any clear sexual orientation. His house was full of people my age, which was 20, and most of them were Navajos. And that was totally new thing to me. And I said, I'd like to maybe teach. What about teaching at a Bureau of Indian Affairs boarding school? And everybody said, "Oh my God, no, 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 you do not want to do that. That's horrible." So I said, "Well, any ideas?" And they all said, "No, Indian education is horrible. I mean, just there's no good place. You can't do that." But then there was this Chinese girl staying there. She said, I just picked up a hitchhiker um, who had been up in Colorado, and he had gotten a job teaching at this school in this little bitty town of San Luis, Colorado. And I took him to an address in Albuquerque, and I actually have the address right here. This is where I let him off. And I said, "Okay, I'm going there." So I hitchhiked to this address. I knock on the door, and I said, I hear there's some guy named Steve here who's going to teach without a teaching certificate or any teaching experience in Colorado." And guy turns around and says, "Steve, somebody wants to talk to you." So he was there, and he said, "Yeah, you go up to Colorado, in Costilla County. It's about the poorest county in the state of Colorado, and they can never get enough certified teachers. So you can get an emergency letter of authorization from the state, and you can teach there. But if a certified teacher shows up, they'll bump you. But that isn't going to happen because the certified teacher's never going to come. And school starts in 5 weeks. So I went up to San Luis. I wish I had some pictures of San Luis. I mean, if it's this little bitty town, it's the oldest town in the state of Colorado. It was founded by Spanish settlers that came up from Santa Fe. It was a land grant, and so well, I'm jumping ahead. I interviewed, and he said, "Well, what can you teach?" I said, "Math." So I don't have a full load in math. I can give you three math courses and 3 English courses. And so you'd be teaching 8th grade math, 9th grade algebra, 9th grade remedial math, and courses in one course in grammar and stuff, and then the other one in literature. And I said, okay. And so I went home. I told my parents that I had a contract sort of to teach in the fall. And they were totally perplexed and worried. So I went back, I went down there. I got this adobe house that was heated by wood stoves, except that the wood stove would go out in the middle of the night. So I ended up buying half a ton of coal, which they just dumped in my driveway. And so I was burning coal, cooking with firewood. And so I discovered that there were 4 or 5 other teachers, 5 other teachers from outside the community who were there the same way I had. One of them was this guy, Steve, who was, I think he was there mainly because he was avoiding the draft and he thought that his draft board on the East Coast would not be able to find him in San Luis, Colorado. And so then one day I'm going to lunch at the El Patio Cafe, and there's this Volkswagen parked in front of the restaurant with a Harvey Mudd sticker on it. So I go into the restaurant and I say in a loud voice, "Who in here went to Harvey Mudd College?" And here's this young guy raises his hand. And I said, "Why are you in San Luis?" He says, "I'm a Vista volunteer and I just arrived." I said, "What's your Vista assignment?" He said, "I don't know. They haven't given me a Vista assignment." I said, "How would you like to tutor kids in math?" I said, "If you went to Harvey Mudd, you got to know a lot more math than I do." And the guy's name was Dan Gartner. And he said, "Yeah, okay. I'll talk to Vista and I'll tell them that my assignment is to help tutor kids in math." So I gave him my top 2 students in algebra, and I gave him my lowest 3 students in remedial math, arithmetic. And so the algebra kids loved Dan Gardner, and the remedial kids immediately hated Dan Gardner. It was like, we don't understand anything this guy's saying, and he doesn't listen to us. So anyway, Clarence Quintana, one of the kids that Dan tutored in my algebra class, went on to med school at CU Med School and became the only doctor from that town uh, in Alamosa Hospital. And I thought this was fortuitous because if I hadn't been there, those kids weren't going to learn any algebra and none of them were going to go to med school. But teaching in San Luis was an adrenaline rush in the positive sense and in the most negative sense every damn day. It was like uh, unforeseeable. And, I thought that I wasn't doing a very good job of it, but the students were very forthright. I passed out the literature book, which was, it was textbooks that had been thrown away by Denver Public Schools 10 years earlier. They were all ragged. And we were supposed to read these stories out of these books. And I passed them out, and the kids looked at them, and immediately I had a couple of kids coming up to my desk saying, "Mr. Davis, I'm not going to read this shit." I thought, oh, that's going to be a long year. Um, and No, just a couple of incidents that, well, uh, a couple of incidents that are worth telling. One of them was that in the math class, the remedial math class, I had this student named Johnny Mestis who knew all this stuff. He was placed in the class because he never turned anything in. He never did homework. He never studied for a test. He was a belligerent, violent kid, kind of inclined toward violence. And he wouldn't do anything, but he understood it all. And he was sitting with Patrick and Daniel in the back, and he was talking to them, and I just got angry, and I said, Johnny, come out, come out of the classroom with me. So we walk into the hall, and I say, listen, I know you're smart. You try to hide it. You understand the math. But by talking to Patrick and Daniel all the time, you're preventing them from learning anything. And so you got to stop that talking. And he said, did you say I was smart? I said, yeah, it's pretty obvious that you're smart. And that the reason you're in this class is because you never turned anything in. But he said, nobody ever told me I was smart before. I said, Johnny, that's not the point. The point is, I don't want you talking in my class and disturbing students who struggle with this math. He said, wow, Mr. Davis, do you really think I'm smart? I said, yeah, I think you're smart. Go back and sit down. So then he comes up to me in I have the same kid for English, and he won't read anything. And he comes up to me and says, Mr. Davis, I would read a book if it had a lot of dirty words in it. And I said, well, I don't know. There's this book called The Catcher in the Rye that's about a boarding school for white kids on the East Coast. It's got bad words. He says, well, let me try it. So I give him a copy of Catcher in the Rye. And like a day later, he says, I love this book. This is a great book. He reads the whole book. He says, find me another book. I said, not till you write a book report. I want proof that you actually read the book and what did you like about it. And he wrote this 3-page, pretty well written book report. And I was stunned. And he said, I love that book. Find me another book. And I said, I'm not sure that there's another book in the world that's actually similar to this book, but I'll try. So I gave him some Steinbeck stories like Tortilla Flat, in which Mexicans were saying bad words to each other and stuff. And he looked at it. He says, nah, I don't like it. So he would never read anything else the whole year. But, kicking ahead, the town of San Luis um, loses population every year because there's no jobs. And so people leave and they go to Denver and Pueblo and Colorado Springs. But they all come together on Santana Day, which is the last Saturday in July. It's coming up. And all the people who used to live in San Luis come back on that day to reconnect with everybody. So I went down there a few years ago, and there's Johnny Mestas. And this is a real amazing thing to me. I remember almost all my kids that I had that first year of teaching. I mean, the adrenaline, the nervousness, and I was so on edge all the time. I mean, they were ingrained into my brain. So there's Johnny, and he's got a booth selling stuff. And I go up there and I said, Johnny Mestis, I'm Alan Davis. And And he said, "This is my wife." And I said, "Well, let me introduce myself." She says, "Mr. Davis, you don't need to introduce yourself. I've heard about you all my life. And, Johnny told me that you're the reason he graduated from high school. He would not have had graduated from high school if you hadn't told him he was smart." And I thought, holy crap. And he said, "Mr. Davis, when you drove if you drive into the town from the south, from New Mexico, you come to this big sign that says, 'Welcome to San Luis.'" I said, "Yeah, I've seen it." He says, "I made that sign." That and I thought, this is a transcendent experience I'm having with this kid here. And it just so anyway, that winter I applied to Harvard Law School, having taken the law school admission test, and Harvard Graduate School of Education. I was admitted to both of them, and I went to the Graduate School of Education. And I have never regretted that. I think that I would have been miserable as a lawyer, but I was very happy as an educator. Um, I and one life-changing thing there was that at Harvard, I took a course in law and education, and there was a Navajo woman in the class, a student named Gloria Emerson. So I immediately got interested in her, and we had a paper due at the end of the course. It turns out that, as far as I could tell, Harvard classes consisted of a midterm exam, a final exam, and a paper at the end, period. Every class I took, that was it. And so Gloria and I got to talking about what we were going to do for our final paper, and we were thinking that we were interested in the claims of cultural minorities, that they should be able to control the syllabi, the curriculum of their schools, and they should be able to diverge from state standards. And I was planning to write. I started looking at not Quakers, at Amish. And I discovered that the Amish had actually gone to the Supreme Court with uh, their right to control their curriculum. I mean, the Amish felt that you students, number one, shouldn't have to go to school beyond the eighth grade, because the purpose of going to school was to learn to read the Bible and to keep books for your business. So you needed to know about math and you needed to know how to read. But that things like science were actually the work of the devil. Science had no business, no basis in the Bible, and students should not only should they not be required to take science, they shouldn't be allowed to take science. And moreover, they didn't want to have teachers that had gone to college, because their minds would have been polluted with the words of the devil beyond the eighth grade and stuff. So I thought, well, that's interesting, but it's already been done. The Supreme Court has ruled on some of these things. And but Gloria said, they're opening the first Indian controlled secondary school is going to be opening in Raymond, New Mexico in the fall. She said, "I want to go to that school and I want to teach art because I'm an artist. And I would like to get an extension on this paper to write about the challenges of a Navajo controlled high school that wants students to take Navajo history, Navajo culture, Navajo language as required courses, but maybe get exempted from having to take American history, for example." So I thought, God, this sounds interesting. And she said, "Yeah." And so I wrote to Tom Cummings and I said, "Do you know about this school?" He said, "Yeah, I'm the principal of that school. I'm going to be the principal when it's open in the fall." And I thought, all right, I'm going there. So I went to Professor Kerp, David Kerp, and said, Gloria and I would like to get an extension on our papers. Meanwhile, the university was on strike because of the bombing of Cambodia. And there were huge demonstrations, and final exams were canceled. And but final papers were still due. But Kirk said, "Okay, but you got to keep me posted, and I'll give you a couple of months to write this paper, but you got to write the paper." And so um, I went down to Raymond, New Mexico, moved in with Tom Cummings again, um, and thought, I started observing in the school. I did not apply for a job. I wanted to check out this school. Well, it seemed the school had been founded by attorneys from Yale. And I think their idea was we sit and negotiate the curriculum with the students. We say, okay, there's never been a Navajo controlled school. They had an elected school board. All the school board meetings were held entirely in the Navajo language with a translator. And so I started observing in classrooms, and it seemed to me that the thing was uh, uh, an utter failure. I mean, here you had these
I just
bright,
lost the audio. Can other people hear?
oh,
Yes.
uh-oh. Can anybody hear me?
Okay, you're
Yes.
back.
I
Oh,
Yeah,
can.
I
okay.
can hear.
I can hear.
Sorry for the interruption.
So now what did I just say before?
You said it was an utter failure. You thought it was an
Yeah,
utter.
yeah. I would go in these classrooms. The kids would all be in the row in the very back, as far away from the teacher as they could get. And some teachers would say, okay, we're sitting in a circle in here. But the teacher would say, so here's my idea of what we're going to be doing in this course. What do you think? And they would be greeted with stone silence. The students they weren't disruptive. They weren't talking to each other. They were just totally ignoring these teachers, refusing to say anything. And I kind of started formulating this theory that if you conquer a people and then the conquerors come in and meet with the adolescent males of that culture and say, we're here to teach you, they're going to say, no, sorry, we don't want you. We don't want what you teach. You're still the enemy. I mean, that's the way it felt to me. Um, but I met this woman named Tessa Stanwood who was teaching down there. I observed her classes. They were dismal. I mean, the kids just wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't do anything. And attendance was drifting away. And, but Tessa had taught at this demonstration elementary school, 4 hour drive into the heart of the reservation. And she was going to go back there for the weekend and asked me if I'd like to go. And I had read about this Rough Rock demonstration school. It was a very successful Navajo controlled elementary school. And the principal was a white guy married to a Navajo woman. They had half Navajo children who attended the school. And it had a great reputation. I wanted to go. And so Tessa and I um, discovered peculiar things that we had in common, to the extent that by the time we had gotten there and then came back, I felt that I was in love with this woman. And so then we immediately got very serious about this. And the community was very conservative in the sense that they didn't think that unmarried people should be having sex with each other. And the Navajo community and the Mormon community, which was all around the school. And so I said, I am to protect our relationship and your job. I'm not going to ask for a job at this school. I'm going to go be a substitute teacher in Albuquerque. So I went to Albuquerque, bought a little motorcycle, rented a room, and taught math in every middle school in Albuquerque. And one thing that I immediately discovered was that it was a powerful asset for a substitute teacher to enter a classroom carrying a motorcycle helmet. I mean, all the kids are like, whoa, you came here on a motorcycle? Yeah. And I had taught in San Luis, and those kids were tough and in your face. So I would say things like, okay, the bell's going to ring in 3 minutes. And when that bell rings, nobody is going to the bathroom. So if you have any desire to go to the bathroom, you've got 3 minutes, go. And then the bell would ring, and 5 minutes later, 6 hands would go up and say, Mr. Davis, I need to go to the bathroom. I said, no, nobody's going to the bathroom. Well, I'm getting my period. All right, you go to the bathroom. Nobody else is going to the bathroom. And so I loved being a substitute math teacher in Albuquerque. And if you're a substitute math teacher, the lesson plan is always the same. Do all the odd problems on page 47. And if they finish those, start on the even numbered problems. And so I would go in the class and I'd say, okay, the plan here is that you're supposed to do all the odd numbered problems on this page. Do you know how to do them? And so if they said, yeah, we probably do, I would say, well, let's do a couple of them demonstration to see, make sure you know how to do them. But occasionally I would go into a class. One of them just was so ingrained in my memory. I went in the class and I said, do you know how to do them? They said, no. I said, so why would he assign problems that you don't know how to do? He says, well, that's all he ever does. We don't think he knows how to do them. He never teaches us how to do anything. He just says, read the book and do the problems. And that's why we're all getting D's and F's in this class. And I said, well, come on, you're not all getting. He said, no, open the drawer and get out the grade book, and you'll see this giant red pencil that's about a foot tall next to it. That's the pencil of doom. And he writes D and F next to all of our names for everything. So I get out the grade book, and it's absolutely true. And there's the big red pencil of doom. And I said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to do these problems. And they were rapt. I mean, they were absolutely thrilled that somebody was going to explain how to do it. And I, at the end of that day, I went to the principal's office and I said, you have a criminally incompetent teacher. He said, yeah, we kind of know that, but he's retiring at the end of the year. I'm going to let him finish out the year. And I thought, oh my God. But the other thing that I really learned as a substitute teacher was generally when I walked into the class, there was either of, what's wrong with Mrs. Whitman? Is Mrs. Whitman sick? I hope she's not sick. Do you know why she's not here? And I thought, this is a good teacher. And then the other classroom would say, "Oh my God, Mr. Herman's gone. Yay, we got a sub." And then they would all shift seats so that the seating plan didn't work and stuff. But I thought this is a method of teacher evaluation that no one has thought of yet. Send a substitute into their class and see what the students have to say. Because they'll either say, "Oh, what happened to her?" or "Thank God he's not here." So that was interesting. So um, Tessa and I got married. And then once again, I thought, okay, I really have to have a job. And, you know, an amazing thing about this life story that I'm telling is that money was never really an issue. I never had any, but things didn't cost anything either. So when I lived in Albuquerque, one day of substituting paid my rent for the month. I was paying $20 a month for a room in this ramshackle house and riding my motorcycle, which got about 150 miles to a gallon. And I, I saved money. When I taught in San Luis, my salary was $5,000, but there was nothing there to spend money on. I saved $3,000.
Huh.
And when I went to Harvard, I was determined that I wasn't going to ask my parents for money. So I took out a $10,000 student loan, uh, and I had my $3,000 of savings from San Luis. And I didn't use up my $10,000 loan. So when Tess and I got married, I was paying off that loan for years, but I still had a lot of cash from it. And so it really bothers me that the life I led could not be lived today. I mean, it's just too damn expensive to not work all the time to pay rent, let alone to buy a house. And holy crap. Um, so I got a job um, teaching at an all white school outside of Denver because I couldn't get a job anywhere else. I, I was under the illusion that having a master's in social studies teaching from Harvard would be a door opener. It was not at all. I mean, basically, the school district said, we don't care where you got certified or what college you went to. We want to know where you did your student teaching. And if you didn't do your student teaching in our district, we don't really trust it. So, it occurred to me that in most school districts, people end up getting their first teaching job in the district where they did their student teaching. And the principal had had an opportunity to observe them and say, this person's going to be a good teacher. I want her in my building. And especially my idea of being a high school social studies teacher was like, no, the way you become a high school social studies teacher is that you suffer as a junior high school social studies teacher for at least 5 years. And then some high school will have a vacancy. And if you have a strong reputation from that junior high, you can go to the high school. But virtually nobody gets hired out of college into a high school social studies teaching position. And biology and social studies are the courses that we reserve for all of our coaches. So if you're not a coach and you didn't teach here and you didn't do your student teaching, it'll be years before you get to be a high school social studies teacher. So there I was but I had other things that were employable. Um, I spoke Spanish and had lived in Mexico. And I had taken the Spanish achievement test when I applied to Pomona, and I got an 800 on the thing. And so I never took any more Spanish. So I was at Carmody Junior High, and they're up for an accreditation review, and everybody has to turn in their credentials. And I'm teaching Spanish in addition to social studies. And they say, so, Alan, turn in your college transcript. We have to certify that you've taken all these courses in Spanish. And I said, well, I haven't taken any college courses in Spanish at all. And then they said, damn, you're not qualified to teach Spanish. I said, well, I speak Spanish. I got an 800 on the SAT. I didn't miss a single question. And they said, no, you're not qualified to speak Spanish, to teach Spanish. We've got to take away your Spanish classes now and give them to somebody who's taken these courses. And oh, from there, I went on to Columbine High School, and everybody's heard of Columbine High School. And there, I taught Russian and social studies. And I think I really was certifiable in Russian because I'd taken a lot of Russian at Pomona, in addition to all through high school. But at Columbine, one of the things that I noticed was that this was a brand new school in a brand new subdivision, and it had all been ranch land. And the kids who were still from the ranch community were known in the school as cowboys. And they chewed tobacco, and they wore cowboy hats, and they wore cowboy boots. And I seriously doubted that they actually had done any of those things before all these middle class white kids moved in the suburban housing developments. But there was that significant social divide. But I found, I was used to teaching students who thought that education was some sort of a gift. And these kids were arrogant. I remember one kid coming up and saying, so Mr. Davis, how much do you make? And I said, $12,000. He says, my dad installs air conditioning and he makes $15,000. Why should I listen to you? My dad didn't even go to college. Makes more than you do. And that was kind of the attitude that I was getting from a lot of these suburban kids. And so after I got to teach economics at Columbine, I got to teach a semester course in psychology. I taught a course in world history. I always taught ninth grade civics. Oh, and one other thing that formed a little theory in my head. All through my teaching experience, I always taught ninth graders. And I was teaching ninth graders in junior high when the system all of a sudden went to middle school. And then I went from teaching ninth graders at Carmody Junior High to the next year teaching ninth graders as freshmen at Columbine High School. And the difference in behavior was dramatic. At Carmody, where the ninth graders were the oldest in the school, the faculty was always reminding them that they were the role models. They were the kids that everybody looked up to. They were the ones that set the tone for the seventh graders and sixth graders, and or the seventh graders and eighth graders. Now at Columbine, they were the youngest in the school. And I'd be teaching a class of juniors, and there would be commotion in the halls. And I'd say, what could that be? So squirrely ninth graders, they're probably shoving each other in the wastebaskets or something. And the ninth graders would be running in the halls. And I thought, man, so if they're the oldest in the school, they act like small adults. And if they're the youngest in the school, everybody calls them squirrely. And maybe part of sociology of status is that to some extent, people live up to or down to the status that the larger group assigns to them. It certainly was a dramatic difference with the ninth graders that I always taught, if they were the oldest or the youngest. And I think I noticed the same phenomenon with college freshmen, that they suddenly want to binge drink and have wild parties and do things that the seniors think are immature. I think 12th grade seniors in high school act a lot more mature than freshmen in college. Again, because of the status applied for them. So now it's after 12, I think. So I should stop. And I hadn't planned to talk this whole time about this personal story of going into education, but I've really enjoyed it. And I just thank you for bearing with me. So the next part of this story is going to involve Brian Stetcher and Lori Santillo, who's parading as Lori Shepard on the screen here, who were the answer to my question. Now that I'm tired of teaching at high school, what can I do now? And I decided I wanted to get a PhD. And Lori had one and encouraged me to join her PhD program. And Brian Stetcher had gotten a master's in math and was seemingly getting restless with what he was doing. And so at the same time, we went into PhD programs, educational research and evaluation methodology. So I want to talk a little bit about that on Thursday, and then get into the issues around adolescence as a subject to try to make sense of.
Lori, can you make sure that I have your email, or Alan, maybe you can help me with that? I'm not sure you're on the list, are you, Lori?
I'm on the list.
Oh, you are? Okay,
Oh,
never
yeah.
mind.
I'm very grateful to be on the list.
Okay, all right, fair enough.
That's terrific, Alan. I've really enjoyed hearing this. A tiny note. I actually have a master's of education from Harvard.
Wow.
But here's the deal. When I was on the faculty in the School of Medicine, I got this thing in the mail after I'd been there about a month, and I opened it up, and it's in Latin. You probably know exactly what it looks like. It proclaims that I have been awarded the degree of Master's of Education. And I think and it has my name on it. So I go to my division chief and say, so Dennis, I got this like funny thing in the mail, and I know enough Latin. It looks like I somehow have gotten someone else's degree in education. He said, well, I guess I should have warned you about that. It seems that in the bylaws at Harvard from 1640 or whatever, you can't teach at Harvard on the regular faculty, in the tenure track, whatever, without having a degree from Harvard. I said, look, what, my Stanford PhD isn't good enough? Nope. And so they award you an honorary Master's of Education, I guess that being the one that they figure is like the minimal thing they can give you. So somewhere in a box in this house, I have a little thing in Latin that says that I have a Master's of Education from Harvard.
Wow.
But you got yours honestly. I just showed up and taught in the medical school and School of Public Health.
Thank you, Alan. That was great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was excellent.
Alan, that was wonderful. It was wonderful storytelling and experiences.
It's really great though that you really love teaching and stayed with it and wanted to figure out ways then to make a difference in teaching, because that
also, I was interested in the transitions that you. I think this is too little emphasized, that how you listen to yourself. You know, you were headed for another career, and you were self-aware enough to go, no, this is just not me. A lot of people wouldn't have made that decision. I think a lot of people would have just followed their nose and kept, okay, this is boring, but I'll just keep doing it because it's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I admire that, that you were listening to what made sense to you and what was meaningful.
Well, and the other
And
thing that was so strong in there was this notion of propinquity. I happened to run into this guy in this restaurant who knew this person who knew about a job opening, and my whole life turned.
yeah,
And
but
when
it
I
was Alan
identify,
list. I'm sorry. It
when
was
I
Alan
identify,
listening to himself. That he listened to those guys.
Well,
They could have been in one ear and out the other, but he paid attention to them.
it's the openness to saying there are more paths than just one, and people, and the listening to people thing. Saying what are their
Yeah, I think, Alan, that you've always been a wonderful storyteller, but listening today, um, some of it I had already known and some not. The intimacy of your storytelling is really gripping. And I noticed that you have the capacity to be both very, very intellectual about what you're experiencing and very deeply personal about what you're experiencing. And I think we tend to do like one or the other. And I just have always loved the storyteller. But today I listened in a way that let me see what exquisite depth there is if you can name phenomenon. We know as teachers that sometimes being able to name and surface feelings and ideas is a talent, and you have it. But man, you did the theory and the deeply personal at the same time, and it's just wonderful.
thank you, Lori. Yeah, and one of the things that I think is peculiar about me too is when I identify one of these people that Tony's talking about that I know if I hadn't had this conversation with this person on this day, my life would have been totally different. I never lose track of those people. I mean, like Gloria Emerson, who I met in this law and education course. I'm in contact with her today. I mean, but she can't remember. She's in a memory unit on the Navajo reservation right now. And Ben Barney, who was one of those Navajos that was staying at Tom Cummings' house at Christmas, he and I have been lifelong friends. And so a couple of years ago, I drove to his house on the Navajo reservation. He and I drove over to Gloria's house. This was 3 years ago, so she was not completely demented by then. But she was like, okay, I know you guys. Tell me. So I'm telling her the stories, and reminding her of that class. And she's like, wow, you've turned my memory alive. I can remember now that course. I can remember going and teaching hard at Raymond Navajo High School, and stuff. But, I like to be in touch with those people and as long as they're alive. Because my life would be totally different if I hadn't met them. So, and that goes for you, Lori Shepherd.
Okay, well, Alan, we look forward to the continued saga on Thursday.
Yeah,
So we'll meet once again. This is again all recorded, and I will post it. I'll send you guys a URL as usual, and then we'll continue on Thursday at 10 o'clock Pacific.
See you then.
All right, guys.
thanks.
Thank you.